The health and well-being of our equine friends is the priority of every horse owner. Since 1994, the Foundation for the Horse, led by equine veterinarians, has been seeking to improve the welfare of horses around the world, empowering the next generation of equine veterinarians, advancing horse health through discovery and innovation, and providing assistance to horses at risk. We are here for the horse. Won't you join us?
Everyone, welcome. This is the second installment of our Horse Owner webinar series from the American Association of Equine Practitioners, otherwise known as AAEP. We are so excited to have you here. My name is Karen Pouts. I'm Director of Education for the AAEP, and I'll be the moderator for this session. But I get to hide behind a turned off camera because you don't want to see the cats walking across my desk the whole time. The American Association of Equine Practitioners is the world's largest professional membership association for equine veterinarians and veterinary students. And there is a good chance that your personal veterinarian is an AAEP member. One of our primary missions is to deliver the latest treatments and research in equine veterinary medicine to our members. This mission extends to providing quality information about the health and welfare of the horse to the clients of our member vets. We appreciate your commitment to your horse by being here with us tonight. This webinar is entitled Riding Out the Storm, Disaster Preparedness for Horse Owners. Our panelist experts on this subject are Drs. Chelsea Folmar and Elizabeth Gorrell. Once we get started, I'll let them introduce themselves a bit further. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. You probably heard me say this before we started, but let me do it one more time. We do want your interactivity during this session. And there's two ways you can do that. One is through the chat box, and the chat box is for just that, for chatting, for sharing thoughts and ideas, but not things that you hope you're going to get a direct response to. If you're looking for a direct response for a question to the panelists, you want to put that question in the Q&A box, simply because it's easier for us to keep organized in the Q&A box. And I see that we've already got one question in the Q&A box. Feel free to start getting those questions in. The worst thing you can do is wait until the last 10 minutes of the session and then start asking all the questions. So you can put them in now. We'll try to get to them all, although I can't promise you that we'll get to every single question because we've got a big crowd in here tonight. And also a reminder that this is not the time to ask questions about your particular horse. That is where your own personal veterinarian comes in. I do want to take a quick moment to recognize the charitable arm of AAEP, the Foundation for the Horse. One of its many charges is assisting horse owners in disaster relief. You can learn more about the foundation at foundationforthehorse.org, and I'll put that link in chat a couple times. And also a shout out to Kevin Hinchman, who you cannot see, but he's here behind the curtain. He's our IT guy and is going to help us in case we have any difficulties in that way. And with that, I think we're ready to go. And I am going to, I already forgot who I'm passing this over to first. Dr. Folmar, is it you or is it Dr. Gorrell?
I think I get to kick things off.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to meet all of you. Thank you for being here for tonight. And thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction and explaining how all of this is going to work. For those of you who don't know me, I am a current large animal internal medicine resident at the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, though, so I grew up in a really small town there. And I've kind of made my way through the Southeast. So I did my undergraduate at the University of Kentucky. I then attended vet school at Texas A&M, and then my first job was an internship in Ocala, Florida. Coming from that more rural background, I was actually a member of my community's volunteer fire company, and I've seen firsthand what can happen when you're not prepared for disasters, but also how communities can really come together to, make a successful endeavor of things. I currently live in Athens, Georgia, and I have my horse Apollo here, who I love to ride in my spare time. I also have my cat Lucy, who hangs around, and two little dogs that keep me company. In my other spare time, I enjoy reading and painting, and I actually love cooking with my fiance. And my current interest, besides internal medicine, I really love emergency and critical care and really owner education. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Excellent. I am Dr. Elizabeth Gorrell. I am a current associate veterinarian at Grand Strand Equine in South Carolina. So I have been dealing with Debbie for the last couple of days. So if you have too, I am sorry. I know it has not been fun. I went to undergrad at a small little school in Southern Indiana named Hanover. And then I went to St. George for my veterinary education. I did a reproductive intensive internship after that before moving to where I am now in a general ambulatory practice. So I get to bebop around the county and see all of my clients' lovely horses. I like to bite off more than I can chew. So I am currently the chair of the Horse Owner Education Committee. I'm also, very conveniently for this webinar, on the Foundation of the Horse Disaster Relief Committee. I serve our local university as an advisor to both one of the sororities and the pre-vet club. And in my free time, which I actually have, I like to go paddle boarding, read and garden and gallivant around in the woods. I have 3 cats who will probably make an appearance during this webinar at some point. Ophelia, Penelope, and Cleo. So if you see them, you can give them a thumbs up. There is a thumbs up feature. So if you're happy with what we're doing or you really resonate with the slide, feel free to give us a big thumbs up. Slide, please.
Let's see if it wants to go forward. There we go.
Excellent. So Karen already talked a little bit about the American Association of Equine Practitioners, but I just wanted to highlight this again because I have many clients who have no clue what this is and why it is important for both them and their horse. So this organization not only works, like Karen said, on getting us well educated on current issues and helping to advocate for the horse in many different areas, but they also are trying to help solve some of the problems that we have in equine medicine, which, if you are unaware of what they are, a quick rundown is that we are not able to attract and retain as many. Clients are learning more and y'all want better care for your horses. And so getting everybody up to speed to do that. So if you have a couple minutes to talk to your vet about like what challenges they're having and what y'all can do together to work together, the AAEP is great for that. Also, I said I sit on the Disaster Relief Committee with the Foundation of the Horse, and we like to be very generous with our donations to disasters, which is way easier to do if we have money. So shameless plug. Okay, Chelsea. So a little bit about what we are going to do tonight. So we're going to talk about what to do before a disaster. That is the most important step. It may not seem like it, but I swear it is. Then what to do during a disaster. Some biosecurity concerns when you're bringing all these horses from different areas together. Some disaster specific advice. We could not cover all disasters, but we're going to kind of hit the ones that we think apply to the most people, and then what to do after the disaster has passed.
So kind of our first step when you're thinking about what to do before a disaster is to make a plan. When you make it, it should not only be in writing, but you want to make sure that it's available in multiple areas and that everyone should be aware that you have a plan for your premises. So whether that includes your trainer, your kids who like to ride, whoever is involved with your horses, you want to make sure that everyone kind of understands that there is a plan in place and that you're going to try to follow that plan as best as you can. This means that you should not only email it or text it to everyone so that they actually have a chance to review it, but it's imperative to actually print it out and have it posted throughout your facility. Great places to put it would be by barn entrances so that if any emergency people are coming through, they have the ability to kind of read what you're attempting to do. You can also put it in tack rooms or even within your trailer so that it can be easily found when needed. Ideally, these plans would be laminated or in a different form of waterproof casing. That way you can protect them from wear, and you want to be regularly reviewing these and keeping them up to date. Unfortunately, even the best laid plans aren't super helpful if they aren't practiced and fully understood by everyone on the farm. In addition to making sure that everyone has a copy and that they are posted, it's helpful if you can do a run through. Think of this like a dress rehearsal before the big event, because when the stress is high and that disaster is approaching, you don't want to be having to review things. You want to make sure that everyone has it down pat. Also, during a run through, it helps you see if there's any gaps in your plan or if there's any misunderstandings that can be identified before that actual emergency happens. For example, if you practice your plan, you may realize that in this certain situation, your horse may not load well, in which case this gives you ample time to work through some training exercises, work with your vet to create a plan, or to organize a different mode of transportation. The last thing to remember is that sometimes, this can be the hardest to remember, ultimately, human safety has to be the priority. We're all here tonight because we love our horses, we love this industry, and most of us would do anything for them. But at the end of the day, we are the priority. We need to make sure that you and the people around you are safe so that emergency responders and everyone on the scene can give their energies to your beloved animals. This means that when you're evacuating, the priority has to be humans first, animals second, and any life-sustaining items, so that's your emergency kit, feed, hay, medications, all the things we're going to talk about shortly are third, followed by personal documentation, and then any irreplaceable or sentimental personal items. And ideally, by having this plan in place, we're going to be able to get as much out as possible to save as much as we can. But again, prioritize, be smart, and be practical. Some things to consider when you're making this plan. There are so many numerous questions that you need to answer. We'll touch on kind of specific advice for different disasters, as Dr. Gorrell had mentioned, but in general, it can be helpful to develop plans based on potential evacuation. So the first question to consider when making a plan is, what are you going to do if you are evacuating with your horses? Generally, you want to leave at least 72 hours, so about 3 days, before the disaster actually strikes. Now, this isn't always possible. If it's something like a tornado, you may not get much warning. However, for things like blizzards or the hurricane that's sweeping up our nation, those things we try to make sure we have plenty of time to be prepared for and that you evacuate as soon as possible. The benefit of doing this is that you reduce your risk of being caught in the disaster itself, in road closures, or in traffic, as sometimes those evacuation routes can get really filled up with other vehicles. The other thing I'm going to recommend is to have at least 2 possible evacuation routes, as those road closures or traffic, or sometimes even the disaster can block off the route that you're planning, and you may not be able to reach it in that state of emergency. In order to reach these places, you need to make sure you have good transportation. So let's get some thumbs up. Who has their own truck and trailer? You're ready to go. Anyone out there? Well, this is something, oh, I see thumbs up. Great job, guys. We want to make sure that those trucks and trailers are in good working condition. So you want to make sure they are up to date on any inspections that need to be done, make sure your tires are filled, anything that can be done to mitigate any potential trouble literally down the road. The other thing to recommend is that if you don't have your own transportation, which is fine, not everyone does, you want to have a list of friends or professional haulers that can help provide these services. Moving on to question number 2, we want to know, what are you going to do if you can't evacuate with your horses? If you are evacuating and not taking your horses with you, it's very important to try to set them up for success to the best of your ability. As I said, we'll kind of go over specifics later, but you should consider how to prepare your property to reduce the risk when your horses are left either in the barn or in the pasture. It's also important to create an emergency kit and make sure that they have plenty of food and water available. This is one instance when it is really important for you to decide on who's going to make medical decisions related to your horses in the case that they may not be able to reach you. For example, nobody likes to think about this, but if your horse suffers a catastrophic injury, or if they need intensive medical care, it's crucial to have a plan in place on who can make that decision, especially if they can't reach you, and what your options are as far as euthanasia. Now, question number 3, if you aren't evacuating, there are a lot of considerations that you need to make, but the good news is a lot of them apply to what we've talked about before. You want to make sure that you have set up your property for success. You want to have plenty of supplies on hand. And the premise of this talk will mainly focus on equine companions, but as I said, humans have to be one of our major priorities in this. So make sure that you also look for resources as far as emergency kits for yourself and your household pets.
Now, one of the things that no matter if you're evacuating with, without, or not evacuating your horses is you're going to need some documents. So we already kind of touched on having documents at the entrances to your barn, but what else do you need? A Coggins. I have many people who choose not to get a Coggins every year because their horse doesn't go anywhere. And if your horse is, hanging out, living its best life in the field, that may be an option that you discuss with your veterinarian. The problem can arise, though, is that I know here in South Carolina, the state will sometimes waive the Coggins requirement to travel. That does not mean that the facilities that are big enough or the private facilities that are willing to accept horses will accept a horse without a Coggins. I cannot tell you the number of times I have been running around before a hurricane trying to get emergency Coggins done. Please have a Coggins or understand, that may limit where you can go. And have multiple copies of your Coggins. Have a copy on your phone. If your vet uses an online service, make sure you know how to log into it. If they have paper copies, make copies. You can never have too many copies of your Coggins. It's also good to have at least a summary of your horse's health records. Do they have any major problems? Are they prone to any issues? If they get fed the wrong thing, are they going to have a metabolic concern? When were they last vaccinated? And with what? I get plenty of people who tell me their horse got a 5-way, and that can be different things based on different manufacturers. So know exactly what your horse is getting. And then know what medications they are on and how much of it they're getting. Like Dr. Folmar said, you want to keep all of these records in either a digital or a waterproof way. I have many clients who have a binder that has those little plastic paper protector things in it, and they just slide those in, and then they put that whole thing in a dry bag when a hurricane's coming. You also want to have photos of your horse. They don't have to be glamour shots. They need to be identification photos. So front, back, sides. If they have any identifiable marks like a brand, make sure you get a good picture of that. And make sure that you have those both in print and digital form. I know I keep saying that, but that's really important. So who actually has any of these documents already together? So if you do, give me a thumbs up. Yes, y'all are so good at this.
2 thumbs up.
Oh, I got like 3 now. So excellent. You also, if your horse is insured, you want to have that documentation with you. Because if something happens, you generally need to reach your insurance company. And if you're trying to remember, oh, is it Bobby Sue with blah, blah insurance? That's not the time to be worried about that. You also want to know information about your facility. So is it your personal barn? Is it a boarding barn? And we're going to touch more on boarding barns first if you have your horses at your own house later. But what kind of general information do you need to have about where your horses are at? So who owns it? Who's the emergency contact for it? Who's the vet? Are all the roads easily accessible to that facility? So it can be helpful to know the number of stalls, what the barn is made out of, if there's any sort of fire suppression system. And it's also very useful to know who the utility providers are. And is it on well water or city water? These are not things that you generally think about when you go to the barn, but it is good to have it all written down somewhere. And then medical directives, which we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. And then that emergency contact list. This list can be long. It needs to have things like your local police department, non-emergency line, fire department, non-emergency line. Most areas will have some sort of disaster preparedness website where they will list all kind of the emergency numbers for your area. Very generally easy to find. And if you can't find it, just call your county or your local government. Have veterinarians info. If you have a second veterinarian, have their info. Farriers, please do not forget your farriers on your emergency contact list. There are sometimes shoeing emergencies or feet emergencies. Have somebody on your emergency contact list that does not live in the area. So if you've got a bunch of people trying to evacuate and they're calling those people for a emergency contact, they may not have cell signal. Remember, you may not have cell signal. So having somebody outside the area who can be an emergency contact can be really great. Okay, slide.
Dr. Gorrell, if I could jump in really quickly, we did have someone in the Q&A ask, just can you explain further why to have photos of horses?
So we're going to talk about this a little bit more in identification, but if your horse is lost or you have to evacuate without your horse and you need some information to prove that your horse is yours, that can be very helpful. I know that people will post on Facebook like, hey, I found this horse, but they just don't want to give it to anybody. But if you've got photos of you and your horse or identification photos, that can go with other proof to prove that they are yours. Okay, medical directives. So this is not something anybody wants to think of, but this is it makes this hard conversation easier if you are doing it when you are not emotional. So we're going to, at the end, I have some links, but this is from Four Hoofs. You can kind of see their watermark in the back. They have a lot of forms that you can fill out. This is who I did my large animal technical rescue training with. And some of y'all have asked about forming your own groups like that. And I would direct you either to your local fire department or a group like this to get one started for you. So it's going to answer all those hard questions. How much is your horse worth? And this is not how much are they emotionally worth to you, because I know you can't put a price on that. But how much are they, are you going to be able to spend on them? If they're insured or not, if they're a surgical candidate, and what type of surgery would you approve? Would you approve if they have a laceration to their joint? Would you approve if they have some sort of traumatic burn? These are all if you can't be contacted. So if you can be contacted, great. But if not, and then again, this is you kind of signing off saying that you're okay with somebody else making the decisions, and you can either assign a specific person or you can put parameters in there that I am willing to spend $2,000 for treatment if the prognosis is that they can be pasture sound. So I know nobody wants to think about that, but please consider that beforehand, and you'll want to do one for each of your horses. And it is okay if the answers to what you want to do with each of your horses is different. So, okay, slide. We got a lot of questions in the pre-registration about what to do if you're at a boarding barn where you may, you're not the one making decisions. The biggest thing is everyone needs to be on the same page. Everyone's goal is going to be the same, is to keep the horses as happy as they can be and as safe as they can be. So ask your barn what their emergency preparedness plan is for different emergencies that are local to your area. If they don't have one, that's not a problem. This is a great time for you to work with them and to work with the local resources to make one. Also, if they have one and there's something in it that you don't understand, this is the time to ask it and be like, I don't understand why we're going to do it that way. Could you please help me understand? It could be because they know that the wind comes in from a certain direction, or there's something unique about that property that means that they need to do it this way. Also, barns are not going to be working like they normally do. The staff is going to be preparing for the storm. They also may not have time for those little extras that are normally part of your board, because they are going to be focused on making sure your horse is safe. So give your boarding staff some grace if, they don't have the right blanket on or whatever, normal care that they get, but is not life-saving at this time. If the barn is asking for help and you are safely able to help them, please do. If they ask that you stay away, then they are probably asking that for a very valid reason. And that should be laid out in their emergency plan, so y'all could talk about this before. If your horse is on any special food or medications or anything like that, make sure that that is at the barn well ahead of the storm, and check with the barn with where they want those things, because where you normally put it may not be a good place anymore if whatever disaster is approaching. And also understand, and this should hopefully be laid out in your disaster plan, that communication with the barn is probably going to be decreased from what you normally get. It may just be a mass text. It may be a Facebook message. I have several barns who they have a boarders group on Facebook, and the barn manager is posting updates on that because she doesn't have any bandwidth to text everyone individually. And no matter if your horse is at a boarding barn or at home, the same thing is true. The main goal is to keep them as safe as they possibly can. So I know your boarding barn is going to have everyone's best interest at heart. Chelsea, Dr. Folmar.
All right, guys. So I know Dr. Gorrell already did a great job kind of hitting some of the highlights of this emergency contact list, but I just want to dive in a little bit deeper. And the reason why is when a disaster is looming, the last thing you want to be doing is trying to Google local farriers, local transportation, or even worse, trying to call friends of friends to ask for a favor. Not only is it good to conserve your cell phone battery, but sometimes you'll be in a place with limited service, you're out of electricity. There's numerous reasons why we want to have this all written down ahead of time as part of our plan. To create this emergency contact list, you essentially want to collect all of the numbers that may be useful. And this is a pretty wide sweeping list. To start with are going to be your points of contact. So this is you yourself as a horse owner, but this can also be a local contact. I have a lot of people here that may live in other states, but their horse is board here in Georgia. So I want to not only know the owner, but you want to have written down either the trainer, the barn manager, who is directly dealing with that horse. As Dr. Gorrell had touched on, sometimes when the emergency and the disaster is moving this direction, it also helps to have someone out of the way of the disaster. That way, if we can't reach you, there's some other number that we can be in contact with who is already authorized to make decisions. Again, this could be a close friend, a relative, or someone who's already evacuated, but have that number written down so you're not searching for it. After identifying these points of contacts, you want to think about who is going to be helping to take care of your horse if an emergency happens. This means having any transportation list written down, not only professional shippers, but what happens if your truck blows a flat tire? Who are you going to be able to call in these circumstances to try and help you out? This also includes your veterinarian. They are going to be essential when you're making these plans. And this is another time when you want to make sure that you have their contact information, as well as a potential backup veterinarian in case you do need emergency care. The other thing I want to really touch on is any technical large animal emergency rescue teams. Depending on what state you're in, I know at Texas A&M we have the vet team there who does amazing work, and a lot of these teams are popping up or already exist throughout the nation. So trying to be aware of their efforts and who is around to help can be really helpful as well. The next group on the list relates to what to do if your horse is lost in an emergency, or what happens if you happen to find a horse on your property when you get back. This list can include things such as lost and found animal websites, such as Facebook groups, local animal control agencies, animal shelters, and local rescue groups. And the final group, and this is just an abbreviated list because there are many emergency response groups that you want to make sure that you're aware of in your area. This is going to include things like the police and fire departments, also public health departments, maybe your local hospital, local Red Cross chapters, and any other group that may be disseminating information about the emergency and what responses are being provided. Now, don't get overwhelmed. This is a lot of words. We're working to put together some more written information for you guys after this webinar. But if you want to take a screenshot, if you want to take a old school photograph of it, this is just a starter for your list on what to have in your emergency box. I realize this is a lot, but when you think about it, we're trying to be prepared for any situation. So we're thinking through logically about what we want on that. I don't know if you guys have ever been to a show and you realize, oh crap, I left XYZ at home. For me, it was oftentimes my clippers for those little last minute fix-ups. And when you realize you don't have it, it's so stressful. Now, I want you to imagine that feeling, and instead you have no electricity, or the stores are closed down, or there's an active emergency happening, and you realize you don't have the supplies you need. And that's when this checklist comes into effect. So when we're starting, I just want to point out a few highlights. The first column focuses a lot on emergency supplies. So these are medical things you want to have there, whether it's gloves or thermometer, which for some reason got cut off on our slide, or even things like bandaging material. One of the questions that we had here was asking about what specific medications we want to have. And I think the number one thing is any medications that your horse is already on. So contact your veterinarian, ask them like, hey, can I get a refill on this? You want to make sure that you're prepared going into the storm for multiple days. That way you're not trying to find something when potentially pharmacies or even your vet office is closed down. The other thing I'm going to try to direct you guys to is to our last webinar. If anyone was able to catch that, give me some thumbs up because it was amazing. Yes, that's awesome. The Equine Emergencies webinar touched a lot about having kind of your own emergency kit and what to be prepared for equine emergencies. And again, working with your regular veterinarian is going to help you out immensely. If I was to have to pick a few, though, I think in my own personal emergency kit, I like to keep an NSAID, whether that's bute or Banamine on hand. I also make sure to have an antiseptic so I can make sure I can clean out any wounds, and then any topical therapies that your veterinarian has recommended for wound care. I think those are all good things to have tucked away. Some additional items that I want to point out is at the bottom of the second column, that extra halter and lead rope. Not only should you have this in your emergency kit, but I'm going to recommend that you have multiple ones in secure areas throughout the farm so that if a disaster hits, you're not running to a tack room that's half an acre away. You're going to have different halters and lead ropes available so you can grab your horse as quickly and as safely as possible. And the last column isn't necessarily for an emergency checklist, but these are handy items to keep in the barn or maybe a shed nearby, someplace secure. But the benefit to having these is things like a saw can help you to dispose of broken branches or other hazards that may come down after the storm, while having nails or extra fencing material can be used to create temporary shelters. So hopefully this can kind of serve as a starting point as you guys put together those kits.
Now, the disaster is here, or it is coming. You need to stay up to date on information. This is if you stayed or left. The radio is very helpful. Make sure that you have a radio that does not require electricity to run. I have a crank radio. They also make battery-powered ones. They make solar-powered ones as well, but if your disaster is something like a tornado or a hurricane, you probably don't want to be outside trying to use it, so don't do that. Local TV announcements, if you can watch them on TV, great. They also stream a lot of their announcements on Facebook or other social media. And speaking of social media, please do not believe everything you see on it about your disaster. I can tell you that we just had a photo circulating our area of a picture of a store that was flooded in a local town. But guess what? That store doesn't exist in that town. And everyone who was from here, thankfully, knew that. But if you don't know the area as well, or if it's an area close to your area, you may not know that. So please rely on local vetted sources. So the police department, the fire department, the Red Cross, your local, most of the counties and stuff like that will have emergency management operation centers. Those are all good social media sites to get information from. Please just don't trust whoever is posting on Facebook. Listen to your emergency management. If you have a weather radio, those are great. They're kind of like a hybrid between a radio and I don't really know how they work, but they're great. But they can be plugged in or battery powered. They generally don't pull a lot of batteries, so they're okay for batteries. And then follow your plan. Follow your plan. And as hard as it is, do not panic. Because if you panic, it's going to make it 5,000 times worse. And so if you need a minute to do some breathing exercises, that is totally okay. And if you are the person in charge during the disaster, if you panic, everybody else who's with you will panic. So as hard as it is, remain calm. If you're one of the people who need to panic, plan to panic after the emergency, okay? Okay, Chelsea. Dr. Folmar, sorry.
That's all right. During a disaster, if you're planning to evacuate, our recommendation is to do it early. I touched on earlier, the ideal time is at least 72 hours before stormfall or before you know that disaster is heading your way. It's important to keep in mind that you can end up stuck on the road for long stretches. Again, when that traffic starts building up, you have no idea if you're going to get caught into it. So make sure you bring plenty of food and water with you. And if possible, try to unload your horse every 3 to 4 hours. This allows them to put their head down, to kind of cough out all that crud in there. It allows them to drink water and to urinate. This can be a stressful time for your horses and for the people involved. So this is once again my reminder to please make sure your horse can load. It's going to make everyone feel so much better when you're unloading and reloading that you know with confidence your horse is getting on that trailer. When you're driving a rig, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes backing it up is not always the easiest thing. So this is again your reminder to have multiple evacuation routes. Trying to do that U-turn when you've got a 4-horse trailer on is not the easiest thing in the world. So make sure you have your map up. If anyone still carries those around, make sure you've got your GPS routes blocked out. And again, having all this written down so you're not scrambling in the last minute is going to be so helpful. When it comes time for you to evacuate, we do recommend that you have a full tank of gas. You make sure that you have someone who's confident driving the trailer, whether that's you or whatever shipping service you're using. And think about how you're going to get other vehicles out of there if you need to. If you need to evacuate more horses than you have trailer space for, plan to either make possibly multiple trips, or if necessary, and this is a hard conversation to have, sometimes you have to prioritize which horses are you loading first. Sometimes this can be prioritized whether it's the most valuable, the easiest to load, personal preference, or which horses can go in the trailer together. So these are all things you kind of want to have in mind while you're trying to evacuate. If you're evacuating, but you have to leave your horses behind, we recommend trying to set them up for success by leaving as many supplies as you can, with the goal being having at least 3 to 4 days worth. These items should be wrapped in plastic or waterproof tarp and stored in a secure area. Some kind of pro tips that I was getting while I was preparing for this is you can actually use clean plastic garbage bags or the actual garbage containers and fill them with water. That way you know you have clean water and you don't have to be waiting on pumps or electricity in order to make that happen. After leaving the supplies, it can also be helpful to include specific care instructions. So as Dr. Gorrell mentioned, it can be helpful to have those feeding recommendations written down, the specific medication your horse needs, especially if it's at a boarding facility. We want to make sure that anyone who's caring for this horse understands exactly what your horse needs. To help increase the odds of your horse being reunited, we recommend trying to use multiple ways of identification. So this can be things like livestock crayons. You can write on their hoof with a Sharpie. I've even seen some of the like hoof paint that people have used before on there. You can also braid a cattle tag or some other form of tag into the mane. And then the picture of this slide is actually a halter tag that's for sale, and it can be filled with your contact information. But you want to make sure that you are using a breakaway halter if you're leaving halters on. One of the great questions we had before starting this webinar is if you're in an area that is prone to fires, what type of material can you use for a halter? And one of the things we recommend is a leather halter. Not only is this good as a breakaway halter or a halter that breaks if a horse gets caught, but it is less likely than some of our synthetic materials to be actually melted in a fire situation. Other natural materials could be ones made of cotton or certain ropes. The last thing you have to think about is how you're going to secure the area. So I want you guys to visualize where your horse is kept right now. Think of anything that's laying around that if a hurricane or a tornado or some other major storm comes through with a high wind, what kind of damage can it be done? So when you're preparing it, this means turning things off like a circuit breaker, checking the fence line to make sure everything's in line, and then putting away those things you just visualized. These can be hazards such as rails that you use to practice either jumps or trail rides, loose buckets, wheelbarrows, anything that you can, please try to secure away. Now, if you and your horse are both staying, if you remember that was number 3 in our plan, a lot of these same guidelines still apply because you may have limited access to your horse. They could still get loose, and you still want to make sure that your property is safe as possible. So again, we're trying to think, how can we set up our horse for success as they weather out this storm?
And then the AAEP just passed some recommendations on microchips. So I know that everyone isn't as familiar with those generally in large animals as they are in small, but they are very easy for your veterinarian to place. And they're actually super easy. Most horses don't even notice we put them in. And we all put them in the same place. And most animal control officers, veterinarians, shelters will have a scanner that can read all of these microchips. So it's not one that you can see, which is easy to forget about it, but microchipping is great as well. And then we got this question a lot, is Is it better for my horse to be in the pasture or the barn? And I wish I had a checklist for you that was like, if this, then barn, if this, then pasture. But that does not exist because everyone's horse, property, everything like that is unique and different. So, things to consider if you're going to put your horse in a pasture. And I would like to thank AAEP members who provided these photos because these are real life disasters that they have been in. Is if they're in a pasture, don't just let them loose into the wild yonder. They can be a danger to themselves because they don't know the area, and there could be obstacles that you have absolutely no control over. They also can be a danger to people trying to evacuate or emergency personnel who are trying to help. One thing a lot of people don't realize is that horses are not reflective in the dark. So if it is dark, stormy, cloudy, anything like that, you may not see a horse until it is too late. So make sure that if you're going to turn them out into a pasture, it has got some fencing around of it. And then make sure your pasture is free of debris. So those poles that Dr. Folmar talked of, if you're putting them in the arena, make sure you get those out. If you store your tractor in that field, move it. A lot of people forget about the drags that they use to drag their field or the arena. Horses do not see those and can very easily lacerate their leg on them. If you have multiple different pastures that you can put them in, try to pick the one that is going to be the least affected. If it's going to flood, put them in the highest one. If there's a fire coming, put them in the one that has the most distance between them and the fire, or if it has some sort of fire break around that pasture, put them in that one. So just kind of consider all of those. Again, with pastures, think, do all these horses reasonably get along? If you've got mares and foals and then you have stallions, that may not be the best option. If that's the only option you have, that's a different thing. But if you can pre-plan and think about this, then maybe you can separate some fields, some for your mares and foals, some for your stallions, maybe some for your older horses, and some for your younger. Just kind of think about who can go together. If you're going to put them in a barn, my recommendation is only put them in a barn if you can be there to take care of them, because the last thing you want is for them to get trapped in that barn. Barns have, they can be built to different specifications, determining like what kind of disasters are in your area. So this is also a great thing to talk to your vet or your local emergency management about what is going to work best. But shelters do not always stay, even if they are designed that way. So take into account what type of a shelter it is. Are you safely going to be able to get your horses out of that shelter? If you can't, if there's flooding, don't put them in there. I know we want to do everything we can to keep them safe, and we're inside our house, and so we want them to be inside shelter. But sometimes that is not always the safest. So we need to critically assess what is going to work best for my horses, my property, and my shelter. So the picture on the right is a picture of a horse shelter after Hurricane Beryl 2 years ago. So that really was like not just some random panels in the field. The roof was split in two, and one part of the roof ended 300 feet away. You know, so just kind of think of something like that. And I know it's really hard because you want to keep them safe, and you kind of feel if you put them inside, they're safe, but that may not always be the safest place for them. So just kind of keep that in consideration.
So now let's say you had the opportunity to evacuate, or maybe you're in a safe place, but you have other horses coming to your property as kind of a refuge there. When horses evacuate, they're sent in large numbers. They're intermingling with horses that they haven't been exposed to before. And suddenly they're all in the same barn. Anytime this happens, there's a risk of infectious diseases transmitting from horse to horse. And this risk can increase or decrease depending on the actions you take. So to help reduce this risk, it's important to keep your own horse up to date on vaccines. It's also important, as Dr. Gorrell mentioned, to maintain an up-to-date Coggins, because although I know there's specific states that waive it, it is entirely up to the facility that you're going to decide if they will also waive the Coggins requirement, or if they're going to turn your horse away if you don't have one that's up to date. Once you are at the facility, try to keep your equipment clean and organized. Now, in an ideal world, every horse would have their own bucket, their own feed pan, everything would be individualized, but that's not reality in a lot of cases. So we need to try and minimize the things that are shared, especially any pathogens. Whenever that happens, you should have careful cleaning between sharing things like water buckets, feed pans, even brushes. Sometimes even where you keep the manure can spread things like salmonella. It's important to think about this during the disaster and trying to say, what can I do to mitigate my horse's risk? It can also be helpful to try and isolate horses or group horses together depending on their risk of becoming sick. So keeping younger foals or older horses away from most of the population can reduce the risk of them picking up something from those other horses. In a similar note, isolating horses that are ill from the masses helps to protect everyone else from whatever is affecting those horses. And when you're working with horses, if the personnel there are caring for multiple animals, it's best to go from the animals that have the worst immune system. So again, think those foals, the older horses, and then go to the rest of the healthy horses before caring for any horses that may be ill at that time. One thing that I actually didn't include on the slide, but I just want to touch on the basics again, not only for animal safety, but some of these pathogens can be zoonotic. So don't forget your own safety when you're thinking of things like wearing gloves or making sure that you wash your hands. That protects not only your horse, but yourself. Now, to get into some specific advice, again, we weren't able to do a completely comprehensive list for this, but we wanted to touch on some of the most common things. So when we talk about tornadoes, you want to make sure, as I touched on, that you secure any loose items that can become projectiles once that wind really starts whipping around. I know in Texas, that's something that they're constantly having to worry about is, how is my property going to handle this incoming storm? One component of that is being aware of any down power lines. Until that property is declared safe, you want to be aware of any potential electrical damage that has occurred, but also any potential hazards. One thing we have featured on the slide is fly masks. One of our members on the committee is an ophtho specialist, so she would be so proud if she saw us worrying about our horse's eyes. But again, when that wind is really whipping, you want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to try to protect their eyes, such as wearing a fly mask as shown. We touched upon trying to decide whether to leave your horse out to pasture or a barn. And there's a lot of things to try and weigh. So again, you're thinking of things like barn structure, trees, power lines, the condition of your property as well as those around you. And are those structures going to flood if you have heavy rain as well as a tornado? It's generally recommended to keep your horse in the pasture during this specific type of emergency. But again, I always refer back to your veterinarian and reaching out to local contractors to see what's going to be best in this situation. And what kind of damage or potential damage could my structures be facing? We had an excellent question from someone in the group, and I hope you're out there tonight, about what type of building material should you use specifically for tornadoes. And unfortunately, because the terrain is different parts of the country experience these storms differently. And also, depending on what structures you already have, I don't have a good answer for you. So once again, I'm going to say, work with your local veterinarian, contact any local emergency groups that you may have. A lot of them already have some recommendations in writing that you may be able to use, and work with local contractors and builders to see in this specific area what tends to hold up the best. Something else to keep in mind with this type of storm is when there's a tornado, there's often not much notice. So that plan that you have worked so hard to create, you need to be able to enact it quickly. When those storm sirens start going off, you have to have that plan in mind and ready to enact so that you can try to be as safe as possible. And after the storm, you want to make sure that you are aware that your horse could face things like lacerations, blunt force trauma as things are moving in the wind, or sometimes, depending on the storm, they're moving in the wind. And then also those eye issues we mentioned before.
Next up, we have floods, and floods can be their own independent disaster, or they can be a secondary disaster from a tornado, a hurricane, a mudslide, something like that. So be aware that this disaster can happen at multiple different times. The biggest problem that we're going to face with this type of disaster is that, unfortunately, horses may have to stand in water. There may not be a great place to put them where they can stand on dry ground. We obviously want to get them to dry ground as quickly as possible, but that may not always be possible. So if you are caring for one of these horses, make sure that you have something like Dawn dish soap or another gentle soap in there to clean them, because this flood water is not clean. There are many hazards in this water, such as sewer runoff, chemical runoff. There can be bacteria and viruses in that water. We've all seen after it rains, the storm drains are kind of slimy and glistening. You don't want your horse exposed to that more than they have to be. There's also hazards in the flood waters. So there could be down electrical lines, charging an area of water. And you kind of, before you go in any water, and if you are not trained to go into floodwaters, do not do it. Floodwaters have currents in them, and they can be very deadly, and you do not want to become the emergency while you are trying to take care of your horse. So there are teams that are trained to do this. Here's actually an example of this. This was after Hurricane Florence in Wilmington. There were a group of volunteers who were boating around looking for animals to help their trained volunteers. And they found these horses, and there was no way to get them out of this emergency. And so they found a porch for them to stand on, and they did the best they could, and they got them hay, and they secured them kind of on the porch so they couldn't leave until the water was safe. But part of what they were looking at in those horses every day is, how are their legs doing? Because their skins can slough during this. So even if your horse was only standing in floodwaters for a short time, please contact your veterinarian to have them look at them. They are also predisposed to getting pneumonia. So if they accidentally inhale some flood water, that can make them sick. 1, from pneumonia, and 2, from any potential pathogens or toxicities in the water. Other fun thing you have to watch out with floodwaters are other animals that maybe are not your horse, such as venomous snakes, or in my area, alligators, maybe in other areas, sharks. So make sure that you're got your head on a swivel. You're not going into floodwaters if you're not trained, and you're looking at those things with your horse when you do get them to safety, such as their legs and their skin, because they are predisposed to getting cellulitis, which is an infection of the skin, and lymphangitis, which is where the lymph fluid does not drain up their leg like it should. And then this is a part that people forget, is please check their feet. They have been walking or swimming all over. They're predisposed to thrush or any of those other conditions we get when their foot has been moist for a very long time. And this is also a place where they may have been injured that you may not notice. They could have stepped on a nail, or they could have had a cut. So make sure you're checking your entire horse when it is safe to do that. Okay. following floods, hurricanes. How many of you here have been dealing with our lovely Debbie recently? Yep, I see a couple. So hurricanes are kind of a good disaster because they give us lots of heads up that they are coming. Best case scenario is you prepare for it and it does not hit you. And that's okay, because that's a free practice round of your disaster plan with a little bit of stress. So if the meteorologists are saying this is going to happen, please listen to them. It's so much better to evacuate and not needed to than to not. This is one of the few emergencies that we can really put our plan into place before it happens. You want to secure, you're right. Sometimes the weather people are not very accurate. I admit that, but that's okay. They're weather people. So we're going to secure as many loose items as we can, because like for the tornadoes, we don't want them getting picked up and damaging horses, buildings, people. We want to make sure they have access to clean water. So even if you're like, oh, I have a well, it's going to be fine. A lot of wells get contaminated and most of them require some electricity for the pump. So like Dr. Folmar said, trash bags full of water. You can also get those giant cubes of water. Whatever will work for you. I know I've said this multiple times. Watch out for down power lines. Assume that all down power lines are live. If your horse is staying through a hurricane, we want to look for lacerations, abrasions. They may have those similar injuries to flood horses with the cellulitis and the sloughing of their skin. They also may have similar eye injuries like our tornado horses. So make sure that you're looking them all over, and talk to your veterinarian about what your plan is with them, that if there is a hurricane and they can't get to you and you have a problem, you have a laceration or whatever, what is the best way for y'all to troubleshoot that issue? And then what are you going to do after the hurricane has passed? Because just because the hurricane has passed does not mean that the hurricane is over. So make sure that you are ready to continue care after that. We got a question about what to do if you cannot evacuate from a hurricane, because we have a member on tonight who was in Grenada when Beryl got hit, and they were asking what could they have done, or were they just lucky? Partially, they were just lucky. If you are in a place where you cannot evacuate, you want to use the tips we've given you to set them up for the most success. But unfortunately, Mother Nature is always going to win. So if you can't get them to safety, just set them up the best you can. And then consider, if you're in a coastal area, storm surge. Because that can be really hard. And if you know that you're in a storm surge area, evacuate even if the hurricane has a 5% chance of hitting you.
So now moving on to fires. This one was a really interesting topic to present on, because this can include not only wildfires, which are, in the news, but also structural fires that directly impact individual families or residencies. Be aware of common fuel and ignition sources. So when we're thinking fuel, unfortunately, that's pretty much everything in your barn. That's going to be things like wood, hay, bedding, gasoline that you use in the tractor to, work your arena, any clothing items, as well as cloth items. So when we think about things such as all of your like blankets for the horses, things like that. And then we also think about ignition sources. So this can be things that you're looking for in your property, such as any frayed wires, improperly cured hay, or small appliances. So coming from Pennsylvania in the winter, we often had to use water heaters. And those are things that you might not always think to evaluate, but it's really important when you're looking at those small things, or fans down here in the South for the summer, and you're making sure that they are in good running order. And then ideally, you want to separate the ignition sources from the fuel sources. So one example is you can kind of keep your hay and bedding separate from the livestock in case you do have any improperly cured hay. Then it's important to try and practice fire prevention by clearing weeds and vegetation from the fence line and up to 100 feet away from structures. So if you are facing any of those kind of wildfire concerns, one of the great questions we had is, how can you help prevent this? How can you try to keep your area safe? And is it enough just to put horses in a part of the pasture that may have already been burnt? I think in that case, you need to think about what we call fire breaks. And these are essentially areas that don't have fuel for the fire to continue on. So examples of that could be things such as a plowed field, ponds, roads, or those already affected areas that we talked about that have already been burned through. The trouble with these is it's important to know that fires can still jump those breaks, especially in the presence of high winds. So you are, setting your horse up for success, but it's not a guarantee that they'll be safe, unfortunately. Moving on from those wildfires, if we go back to some of those structural things, you want to make sure that your house number is clearly posted and legible from the road. That was always something really frustrating with our fire department, is if you're trying to go to a rural place, that road may not be marked well. And from the road, you may not be able to see the house because it's offset back. So trying to make sure that any local fire departments can easily identify they have the right place when that fire is happening is going to be helpful, because every second counts. You also want to make sure that you post and enforce no smoking signs, as that is another ignition source that we do not need on the property. It's important to make sure that you have smoke detectors that are present and functional. And there was some interesting reading I was doing about thermal and flame detectors, or even fire suppression systems that are starting to be installed in more and more barns. So for our boarders out there, or for people who are looking to build new barns, that's something that you can ask about and see what is available for your area. Another kind of something like that would be even something like a sprinkler system. And then it's really important that you not only have fire extinguishers, but that you train people how to use them, because you don't want to be standing there trying to read those ABC instructions if there's an active fire that's coming around you. And I know I already touched on this, but in the case of a fire, whether it's on your property or if it's a wildfire heading your way, you want to know what is going to be a safe route that you can take your horses through. So having multiple routes laid out is only going to make sure that you have a way that you can escape safely and quickly. The last thing we touched on was kind of those halters that I recommend having multiple places. If you think about a barn environment, most places have a singular tech room, and that's where everything is kept, which is great when you're trying to keep things secured. However, if that is a part of the barn that is on fire, if you don't have backup halters, whether in your emergency kit or in other places on the farm, you may not have an easy way to get your horses out of there and keep them contained. I know sometimes when I've gone out to properties in a last-ditch effort, I've even seen people take off their belts and use that. So be resourceful. I know you guys can do it, but try to set yourself up for success by having those halters multiple places. And after a fire episode, some things you need to be aware of is things like lacerations that they can have, whether that's from things falling down or even burns. And then the last one that people may forget about is respiratory issues from all the smoke inhalation. So having a veterinarian out to check them out and make sure that even though outwardly and externally they look good, that there's not something kind of underlying, especially with that respiratory system, that you may be missing. So now another one that's near and dear to my heart, anyone from up north. Luckily, Pennsylvania doesn't get too many blizzards, but it does get very frigid when I compare that to my friends down here in Georgia. Oh yeah, look at those thumbs up. So ideally in these situations, and this is both for blizzards and just major snowstorms, it helps to have a warm, well-constructed barn. However, horses often do just fine. That's actually my horse there on that left picture. He's chilling out in the snow without any bother, as long as they have adequate shelter to break from the wind. If there is any questions about the stability of the structure, so this is going to be things like if you have a lean-to or maybe a really old barn, beware of cave-ins that happens under the weight of the snow, because when it's coming down, it can really build up and can test those structures that you have, in which case leaving them outside in the pasture would be the better option. Another thing to keep in mind is that horses without an adequate hair coat, so if they're actively in show and you've clipped them, or maybe for some reason your horse just hasn't grown in their winter coat yet and we get an early storm, try to fit them in a well-fitted, warm, waterproof blanket. Trying to keep horses dry is going to be much better of an insulation to them than if they become wet. So even removing any standing mud that happens when we have those freeze-thaw cycles can be really helpful to them, as it makes it difficult for them to thermoregulate. Horses also require more hay in the winter, so make sure they have enough forage to help them stay warm. It's also important to try and keep them in appropriate body condition, that little extra layer of fat, although we don't want to see obese horses. That has all of its own health issues that I see as an internal medicine person. Trying to make sure that they are healthy, so having that body condition score somewhere between 4 and 6 is going to give them the best chance of weathering the storm as well as possible. In addition to having enough hay, water is so important. I mentioned the water heaters we have to use. I actually, from my grandfather's house, would have to bring out warm water to thaw pipes, because you can lose water whether the pipes thaw, you lose electricity. Sometimes the pipes burst, which brings its own concerns as far as freezing and slipping and other hazards associated with that. So this is another instance when having access to clean, thawed, fresh water is going to be so important, because horses, when they're deprived from water, not only do they become dehydrated, but you can put them at risk for other things such as colic. If you have a generator, that's awesome. That can help you with those kind of electrical issues you may have in these storm events. Make sure that you have some extra fuel and that it's well maintained, so that you don't go from having a blizzard episode to having a fire episode. With these cases, it's also important to be aware of hypothermia for your horses. So this is most often found in older horses, young horses. If you have foals that are being born and it's still those early winter months, I've seen them where the little tips of their ears have been frozen off. And then smaller animals such as minis and donkeys are all kind of at risk for hypothermia.
Now we're going to talk about droughts, because some areas of our country are more predisposed to these. And I know we have some lovely international visitors tonight. So you want to identify other water sources than your primary water source and communicate with your local county, city on what the water restrictions are and what they can do to help you. And having this conversation beforehand will be helpful. Also, sometimes the local water people don't know that you have horses, and maybe you do need more water because you're not just watering your grass to make it green. It is a food source for your animals. You are at a higher risk of fire if there is no moisture in your grass. So you need to be careful about things that may cause fires. Like Dr. Folmar was saying, don't smoke, don't set off fireworks, don't do burning your trash, don't do things like that. If you do have some pastures, try to do rotational grazing so that you are not taking one pasture and getting it beat up, and so it won't grow at all. We routinely forget about our local extension offices, but they can be great resources to help you figure out the best way to kind of mitigate the lack of water that you're getting. And that may be that you need to grow a certain type of grass or a certain type of fertilizer, or they have all that information and they're great. Also, weeds, we all know, love to grow in harsh conditions. And unfortunately, some weeds are poisonous to horses. So your vet or your extension office will be great at helping you identify what those look like so that you can be on the watch for them. But horses routinely will not pick to eat a poisonous plant, But if they don't have any other options, they will. They're also more likely to get sand in colic at this time because they're pulling up those roots of the grass or whatever kind of forage they're getting. Or you may be putting hay out for them on the ground, and then they are eating that straight off the ground and eating hay at the same time. So you can do things like sand clear or put mats down to kind of mitigate that sand ingestion. And if you have questions about like what works best in your area, ask your vet. It also can change what parasites are prevalent. So making sure that you have a good biosecurity and a good deworming program will be very helpful. And that's kind of, unfortunately, like horse and location specific. So I can't give you a good do this. If your horse is not getting any natural forage, they may not be getting enough vitamin E. So if they're just getting hay and not enough fresh grass, that they can get some vitamin mineral deficiencies. And long-term vitamin and mineral deficiencies are very hard to correct. And they can still have long-lasting effects even once you correct them. So making sure that your horse's diet is balanced for the environment they're in, and those kind of omegas and vitamin E that we normally get for them may not be there. If you suddenly have to change their feed, try to keep some feed in reserve so that that can be a gradual transition. I think we all know that horses love to colic with the slightest, little bit of motivation. So if we can make it easier on them to have that gradual transition, that will help them. Try to have multiple water sources. You don't want it to have a large surface area though, which is kind of counterintuitive. We like to put big troughs out for them, but that is going to have a greater risk of evaporating because in a drought, the air is going to be very dry. So things with smaller surface areas like buckets, so more deep than wide, will help them get through it. And then being able to monitor your horse's hydration status. So this is a great thing to go through when your vet is doing your horse's well checks, is ask them to show you, how are you checking if their mucous membranes are pink and tacky or moist, or what are you looking for there? And how to do a skin tent on your horse to assess hydration status. Now, this is not perfect. As we all know, as you get older, your collagen makes it less stretchy. So older horses, this may not work as well, but talking to your veterinarian about how you can identify if your horse is becoming dehydrated and what you can do to intervene in that time.
So I believe this is our last kind of emergency we're going to talk about specifically. And I just want to touch on mudslides and sinkholes. I know these kind of affect different areas of the country, whether it's California with the mudslides or down in Kentucky has a ton of sinkholes. These mud emergencies can be really traumatic though. So some general advice, whether it's, again, kind of one or the other. As far as mudslides go, do not build near steep slopes, close to mountain edges, near drainage ways, or natural erosion valleys. And this is another time when those kind of county extension agents, as well as local builders, are going to be able to kind of let you know what the hazards are for your specific area. It's important to have that evacuation plan in order for when your area has events such as storms, earthquakes, fires, really intense freeze-thaw cycles, or even sometimes if there's certain human modifications like new building projects that can all increase the risk of mudslides, you want to be aware of what those risks could be so that if a big storm's coming, you can get out of the way before you have both the storm and a potential mudslide to deal with. Those mudslides also have really unpredictable patterns and they can extend for miles from their source. So once again, you're probably tired of hearing me say this, multiple evacuation routes. That's the key to success. You want to make sure that wherever you want to go, you have a way to get there. If there's a diversion of mud or water that's necessary, you can stock up on sandbags at home and try to help create some safety areas for both your horses and yourself. But I do recommend working with kind of local emergency groups to try and make sure that you know how to properly use the sandbags and how to use them most efficiently. When there seems to be some flowing water or a potential mudslide, do not go into any rapidly flowing streams, and make sure you're staying on kind of one side of that until it's receded and you've gotten the all clear from emergency services. Many mudslides occur as the soil dries after an extended wet period. So even when you think that risk is gone, this is one of those times where listening to those emergency service announcements are so key, because a mudslide can take place several days after that initial rainstorm has taken place. And before you have any of this concern, you want to be looking at the structures on your property, checking the foundations, and seeing what the risk could be. Now, moving more into kind of the sinkhole situation, if you have a horse that is actively stuck in the mud, the first things you want to be doing are calling your veterinarian, using that emergency call list to reach out to either your local fire company, or if you've identified a large animal technical emergency team. That way you can make sure that your horse has the proper medications it requires and the equipment to get them out of that situation without putting yourself or the horse in harm's way. You always want to make sure you use caution when you're approaching the area, as oftentimes the ground around sinkholes may be unstable. And the only thing worse than having your horse stuck in the sinkhole is having you get stuck right along beside them. Horses can oftentimes be exhausted, whether they get caught in a mudslide or the sinkhole themselves. And there's a lot of damage that can occur as they're struggling to get out of that deep mud. So again, having a veterinarian there not only to provide sedation if needed to use the equipment, but also to assess their limbs, to look over their hydration status. All of those things are going to kind of set your horse up for the best possible outcome. And as I mentioned, we weren't able to talk about all of the emergencies. So if you take something away from this talk, although I hope you're getting a lot out of it, talking to your vet and creating that plan is going to be key. So I have pictured here, lightning storms, whether it's earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, extreme heat waves. Mother Nature can throw so much at us. It's important that we try to be prepared for our specific concerns in our specific area.
You made it through the disaster. Now you get to come home. Yay. When you come home will determine if you evacuated with or without horses. If you evacuated with your horses, please stay until your emergency services management is telling you that everyone can come back. I know that we are very frequently told that if you don't have a vested interest in coming back into the county, you may not come. I have to carry a special letter with me if I leave the county to come back in to say I'm essential personnel and y'all need to let me back in, please. So if you have evacuated with your animals, just sit tight. If you are coming back, either you for some reason have to come back with your animals before the all clear is given, or you had to leave your animals here and are having to come back and check on them, make sure that you are still getting the all clear from your local emergency services. You can call them and tell them exactly where you're trying to go. They may advise you that that is impossible at this time and to not come. If you come back, you can be a drain on the system and make the emergency personnel who are working their job 10 times harder. So I know we all want to come back and we all want to see what's going on and make sure that our stuff is safe and help how we can. But sometimes the best way you can help is by not coming back yet. So if you come back to check on your horses, check the structures around you. Check to see if your buildings are still intact. Check to see if they still look stable. Are they hanging on by a thread? Are they safe to go back in? You don't have to be the expert in this. You can get a contractor out in a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, but look for obvious things. Are there any down power lines? Like we said, all power lines are live power lines until the electric company tells you it's not. If you have any concerns about the safety of any structure or any power lines on your building, do not go in there and just wait until somebody who is trained in those things to handle it. Check your water supply. If you are able, when you come back from a disaster, bring your own water supply, bring your own feed, bring all your own supplies. If you're coming back, be prepared to be self-sufficient until the local economy can get back up to normal. All the feed companies, hey, people are going to work as hard as they can. And if it's a significant disaster, people will work very hard to help you get the resources you need. But if you can bring your own back, so if you evacuated without your horses, bring back as much as you can fit in the car. That safe water source may not be the water source that was safe when you left. So if you're on well water, or you normally use a creek or something like that, those all could be contaminated. So make sure that you're checking that. And if you have space in your car, bring back extra supplies. Like if you're a boarder and you want to be able to do something, and they've given the all clear that non-essential personnel may come back, bring supplies for your barn, bring supplies for your horses. You can even bring supplies for your barn manager who probably has not had time to take care of themselves.
So this brings us to one of our last slides in this, guys. Thank you for hanging in there. We really appreciate your attention this evening. We want to make sure that if you did have to leave those horses behind, that you have the resources you need to try and reunite with them. So you guys have already created an awesome plan. I have full faith in your ability to do that. During the disaster, you made sure that your horse is not only microchipped, but hopefully you have multiple ways to identify them. You've braided in the tags. You have all of your paperwork in order. So what can we do to try and reunite with your horse? One thing you can do is to reach out to local law enforcement, animal control, and animal care officials, veterinarians, and neighbors for any lost animals. This includes your own personal horses, but you would be surprised the number of times if you have a facility that hasn't been as affected as much, horses are coming to you that may not have an owner at that time. So trying to share that information can be really helpful. Again, using online resources for lost and found animals. You'd be amazed at the Facebook pages that'll pop up. Sometimes even Craigslist things will appear. So try to reach out and use multiple sources to contact your community and get everyone where they belong. And lastly, I know we touched on Facebook, but a lot of the younger generation are going to be doing things like maybe TikTok or Instagram or things like that, utilizing social media to try and post information about lost and found animals. And this is my thing as a bit of an older crowd here. I'm going to say, don't forget even just using things like flyers when you're going to, feed stores, posting things at your vet's office, like the actual flyer themselves. Any way you can get out pictures of your horse or information about them is going to help increase your chances of being reunited.
And then we had some people in the questions ask kind of like, what was the best tip we learned while we were putting this together? And mine is that your disaster preparedness plan is a living document, and it needs to be updated and practiced routinely, because if it's not, then it's not going to be useful for you.
Yeah. And for me, I think one of the big takeaways I had was communication. Things when a disaster is happening can change very quickly. And not only do you need to be able to deal with that adjustment, but you also need to be prepared to communicate that situation with everyone involved. So again, having that emergency contact list so you can disseminate information quickly, staying up to date on what's available by using all those amazing radio options we talked about earlier. All of those things are going to give you the best chance of success. So communicate.
Wow. There was so much. Oh, look at all those resources. My goodness. As a reminder, this session is recorded, and we'll be posting it, and everyone who's registered will get the link. Otherwise, you can find it on aaep.org. But thank you so much, Doctors Elizabeth Gorrell and Chelsea Folmar. This was incredibly thorough. And even though we weren't able to get to all the questions, I think you answered most of them just talking. And attendees, if your question wasn't answered, talk to your vet. I think if you take anything away from this session, it should be plan ahead, prepare, practice, and talk to your veterinarian. They can help so much with this stuff before the disaster hits, not after. And sadly, these are disasters. There's not always a good answer to this stuff. This is not mild annoyance preparedness for horse owners. This is disaster. We hope you never have to deal with it, but if you do, we hope that you've done what you can to prepare. And I kind of agree with the social media discussion. There's so much good information out there. There's also, because it's social media, a lot of rotten information out there. So, use your common sense. But I want to thank everyone who attended. There were some really excellent comments in chat from people who have gone through some of this stuff. And of course, excellent information from our panel of veterinarians. So thank you a million times over. And I think I'll let everyone go now with one last chance to wave goodbye. Thank you, everybody. And this is the awkward moment where I just hit the end button and we all hang up. There's no pretty way to do this. So thank you, and we hope to see you again. All right, and we're gone.
The health and well-being of our equine friends is the priority of every horse owner. Since 1994, the Foundation for the Horse, led by equine veterinarians, has been seeking to improve the welfare of horses around the world, empowering the next generation of equine veterinarians, advancing horse health through discovery and innovation, and providing assistance to horses at risk. We are here for the horse. Won't you join us?